So, how do we decide which year two or year three players we should be holding on to and which ones we should be looking to trade away? That's the topic for today's video. I'm going to cover a couple of young players that I'm avoiding in Dynasty, and we're going to talk about why sometimes less is more when it comes to evaluating potential breakouts. So, let's jump in. Real quick before we get started, I'd just like to point out that somehow 88% of you are not subscribed to the channel. I don't know what that's about. Could we fix that, please? If you enjoy my Dynasty content, please hit that subscribe button. That gives me more freedom to do research and writing and just keep creating content that you'll enjoy. So thank you in advance. Now on to the topic at hand. Last week, I made a video all about replaceable players, trading them away for draft picks. Put a link to that video in the description if you want to check that out. I received a lot of questions about players going into year two or year three, players that are kind of like breakout candidates. And I was asked if I would apply that same advice from that video to those sorts of players. Basically, how do we know when it's time to let go of a young player? The answer is we don't. We genuinely just don't. This is one of the most contested issues in the Dynasty space. Everybody has their own answer on this. It's going to be case by case, analyst by analyst. We just don't have an exact science to this. Now, what we do know is that the whole Dynasty market is rising on rookies, is reacting more dramatically to rookie breakouts. You know, you look at somebody like Tank Dell, what he did in a limited sample last year. I think if this was a few years ago, he wouldn't be a 5th round startup pick. I don't think people would have reacted as much to what he did. A few years ago, I don't think we would see profiles like Ladd McConkey or Keon Coleman going in the 7th round of startups. So I think there's a shift to being more bullish on rookies. And I think that that's sharp. I think that's correct. But whenever we have a player that's entering year two or year three that hasn't fully broken out yet, we do find ourselves at a bit of a crossroads. And I don't mean somebody like Jalen Hyatt, who did so little as a rookie and has such low expectations moving forward that they're essentially free in all formats. The decision between Jalen Hyatt and a random future 4th round pick is not meaningful. But I think somebody like Jackson Smith-Njigba really encapsulates the archetype of player that I'm talking about. Very polarizing because we have these strong priors on him that he's a good player. People invested heavily in him in Dynasty, but he has kind of a mediocre rookie season. So there are these two competing instincts, right? You can double down on a guy that you think is good and you can hold on to him and hope that he breaks out. Or there's this other instinct to ship him off and try to hit on the next guy. And obviously the right choice in these situations is just going to vary from player to player. Sometimes the right thing to do is move on. Sometimes the right thing to do is hold on. But I can say personally, I lean towards being a more impatient Dynasty manager. I don't like to wait around for the breakouts. The Dynasty market moves so quickly, things change so fast that I would just rather get in on the next guy. And I find that when you're too patient, you end up rostering a lot of guys like Rashad Bateman, Treylon Burks, Jalen Reagor, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Zach Wilson. These guys that, you know, they showed us as rookies that they weren't who we thought they were. And yet we just continued to make excuses. We bought back in because you can make excuses for any player if you try hard enough. You know, you take Treylon Burks, for example, he goes in the 1st round. He ends up on a pretty open depth chart. I had people pretty excited about him as a rookie, and he falls short of expectations, but you can kind of squint and make the case for why his rookie season wasn't that great. You know, he had a pretty high yards per out run in a limited sample of games. He was in a bad offense, which, you know, maybe that was limiting him. He dealt with some injuries, or he's a raw player. He got unlucky. There's so many ways that you can justify this poor performance. And the result is last summer, his ADP was in the 6th round of Dynasty startups. But then this past season, we get this injury riddled, disappointing year two. He doesn't make the leap people are hoping. Now he's dead. He has no value. You're lucky if you can trade him for a 4th round pick. I've seen him hit the waiver wire. So that's how fast things change for year two and year three players. That's an extreme example, but I do think it illustrates the leeway that we offer to rookies as long as they're just not downright awful. Again, we can talk ourselves back into any player as long as they had some buzz at one point. But if we zoom out and we look at the best assets in Dynasty, most of them flashed that greatness as rookies. You can see the first 3 rounds of Dynasty startups here, and most of these players were really good as rookies. There are some exceptions, of course, but even those I don't think require a ton of mental gymnastics to kind of justify and explain. You take Josh Allen, for example. Yeah, he required patience. He wasn't a great passer early on, but he was always scoring fantasy points. He was a useful fantasy asset even when he was a bad quarterback. Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't come on right away, but he showed us huge target earning potential down the stretch during his rookie year. Travis Etienne was injured. Jordan Love and Patrick Mahomes, they were on the bench. They were behind other quarterbacks, but their play on the field spoke for itself. You can maybe point to Drake London and Brandon Ayuk as players that didn't break out as rookies, but I think that's where you really have to go beyond the box score. Like Drake London had almost a 30% target share as a rookie. His PFF grade was incredibly high. His yards per out run was 2.4. And then Brandon Ayuk, he averaged 15 fantasy points per game as a rookie. He had a 23% target share, which is still quite high. So as far as I'm concerned, those guys confirmed their talents during their rookie seasons. If you go a little further down the board, you run into players like Nico Collins and Kyron Williams. And yeah, those were guys that kind of came out of nowhere. We weren't expecting them to break out based on what they did in their rookie seasons. But the equation's a little different with those players because they were so cheap to acquire before they broke out. I've got no problem loading the bench with guys like Nico Collins or Kyron Williams. They were going well into the double-digit rounds in startup drafts. Where I take issue is when the opportunity cost is that of a first-round rookie pick or of legitimately good players, right? So you look at somebody like JSN, this is a player that's still routinely being traded for future first-round picks. And if we're trading future first for a year two player, we should be pretty confident that not only are they going to break out, but that they have legitimate upside. So I'm going to make the case for why we shouldn't be sending first-round picks for JSN, and by extension, other players that look like JSN. But I want to make one thing perfectly clear before I start. I am not saying that one, JSN is bad, or two, that he can't end up being a really good fantasy asset. He was obviously a good prospect, and the NFL is just super weird. At the end of the day, our sample size is way too small for the number of variables that we have to account for. So I would never say that he can't bounce back. My stance on JSN is entirely related to opportunity cost. This is how I make almost all of my decisions in Dynasty. It's all about the upside versus the downside, and what do I have to forego in order to invest in this player. I think with JSN, the things that I have to pass up on to invest in him are too high. If he costs what Nico Collins cost last year, I'd have him on every team. But I do think the risk outweighs the upside with JSN at his price, which is where I think a lot of people go wrong when they're trying to evaluate non-rookies. I often see year two and year three players grouped in with incoming rookies as a way to contextualize their value. Like how can you prefer Xavier Worthy or Lad McConkey to JSN? If they were in the same class, JSN would obviously go first. And the problem with that is they aren't in the same class. Rookies are an entirely different asset than non-rookies. They're essentially wrapped in bubble wrap. Their value is insulated. There are a lot of analysts that try to put this negative spin on the unknown, the idea of taking the mystery box over the boat. I think there's a lot of benefit to the unknown because when you don't know a lot about a player, you don't know what their absolute ceiling is. And what we do know is that there's a finite number of those elite league-winning players. Maybe there's 30 of them. Maybe there's 40 of them. It depends on, how loose your definition is, but it's just simple math to say the vast majority of players that you can roster are not going to be league winning players. This means that most of the time you'd prefer to know less about a player than more. You take somebody like Deontay Johnson, right? He's a good wide receiver. He's probably better than several of the wide receivers that are in this incoming class. And yet he is drafted in startups after 9 of the rookie wide receivers in this class. Why is that? There probably aren't 9 rookie wide receivers that are better than Deontay Johnson. Well, we know who Deontay Johnson is, and we know who he isn't. And what he isn't is a league-winning player. Now, I happen to think Deontay is too cheap and that you should probably be trading for him. But the point is that we are chasing this upside rightfully. We are chasing players that can provide us that irreplaceable production. And the more we know about a player, the less likely it is that player is the answer to that question. Now, just to back up here, I am not saying that JSN is destined to be the next Treylon Burks and that in 12 months' time, you'll find him on your Dynasty waiver wire. But his rookie season was bad. Let's not get it twisted. He scored under 9 points per game, and he had a 17% target share. When you look at his rookie PFF grade in conjunction with his yards per out run, he falls into a pretty concerning group of rookies from last year. That includes Quentin Johnston, Jonathan Mingo, Jalen Hyatt, and Marvin Mims. And if you look at the entire list dating back to 2017, really the only success story is Michael Pittman. So there are absolutely good reasons to be concerned. And I am concerned. This type of a rookie season does not automatically make JSN a bust, but I do think that it increases his downside and I think it decreases his upside. After that rookie season, we have seen a large part of the picture of who JSN is as a player, and we don't really like what we've seen so far. So if we continue to see more of the same, his value is going to plummet, just like the examples I've talked about earlier. And I would argue that his rookie season is pretty good evidence that his upside isn't what we thought, or that his chances of hitting whatever his theoretical upside is aren't as high as we thought. I've heard the excuses for JSN, but are DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett really good enough players to limit an elite wide receiver prospect to fewer points per game than Darius Slayton and Rashid Shaheed. At the very least, JSN is a thinner bet than he was a year ago. Now let's try to make this whole concept more broadly actionable. So when you're evaluating a young player, not a rookie, they have different rules. A year 2 or year 3 player, ask yourself these questions. What is going to happen to their value if they do exactly what they did last year? What's going to happen if they improve a little bit? And what's going to happen to their value if they improve a lot? Once you answer those questions, you kind of have to subjectively decide how likely each of those outcomes are. And I think it's a good starting point. And I'd like to show you an example with another young player that I'm avoiding, which is Bryce Young. If Bryce Young does what he did last year, he scores 10 points per game again, and he looks like one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL, he's going to be the next Zach Wilson, the next Mac Jones. He will be borderline worthless in Dynasty. If he improves a little bit, he probably finishes as like a low-end QB2, high-end QB3, which is right in line with his underdog ADP of QB25. I think the market is baking in a little bit of improvement for him going into year 2. Dave Canales coming in, better weapons. That's a reasonable projection for him to improve a little bit. In that outcome, you're still left with pretty replaceable production at quarterback, like comparable to guys like Derek Carr, even Gardner Minshew. As far as his dynasty value, it would probably remain mostly the same. Maybe it would go up a little bit if there's some optimism that he's on a good trajectory. But in order to see a big jump in value, he's going to have to massively improve in 2024. We're going to have to see a totally new quarterback as if last season didn't even happen. So if this happens, he looks much better throwing the ball. He still doesn't run, obviously, but he's just really efficient as a passer. Maybe he can sneak into that low end QB1 range. That feels like his best case scenario. So in that world, where is his dynasty value? In my mind, that puts him somewhere in the Tua Brock Purdy zone. So that's like a mid to late 3rd round startup pick. He has better draft pedigree than those guys, but he has worse weapons. So I think that's kind of where you'd have to split the difference if he's able to hit this narrow outcome. So to be clear, if everything breaks right for Bryce Young and he's able to bounce back in a way that very few year 2 quarterbacks ever have, you get an asset that's valued around the 3-4 turn and a quarterback who's likely incapable of ever finishing top 5 because he doesn't really run. But what if you trade Bryce Young right now for a random future first? What is the range of outcomes on that pick? Well, the downside is non-existent. If that pick turns out to be the 112, you're getting a player that's probably drafted around where Bryce Young's drafted right now. You look at ADP, Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas, Keon Coleman, they're all going within 5 picks of Bryce Young. So that's about the range of the floor value of that 1st round pick if you trade for it right now. And the upside is just as high, if not higher, than that 3-4 turn that we picked out for Bryce Young, because we know that early rookie picks get boosted up in value. There are 4 or 5 rookies that are going ahead of where Tua is going right now. So even if we say that that random future first has a 0% chance of becoming the 101 or the 102 because teams that are that bad just probably aren't trading their picks, you could easily see whatever team trades you that pick miss the playoffs. If they're starting Bryce Young, they probably will. And now you're looking at the 4th overall pick, the 5th overall pick. I think that that upside is almost as high, if not higher, than what you could see from Bryce Young, but you've completely eliminated the downside of that investment. So I think, you reframe it that way. Trading for the pick is an easy decision. So the next time you're thinking of trading for or trading away one of these younger players that hasn't broken out yet, try to think through those questions. What's going to happen if they do what they did last year? What's going to happen if they are a little bit better? What's going to happen if they're a lot better? And what's the likelihood of each of those outcomes? That's going to do it for today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and definitely go check out the video in the description. It's all about trading replaceable players for future draft picks. Leave a comment down below if you've got a question about any year 2 or year 3 players. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.